Welcome to the Appleseed, where we bring you and your family great stories from great storytellers. On today's episode, we'll bring you a helping of softness.
You're my sweet cakes, baby. Do you know you're my sweet cakes?
And a hint of foreboding.
Her arms had been put on backwards. They made triangles that pointed behind her, and they were bolted to her side, and she came around the corner like this.
I'm your host, Sam Payne, and today we're reminded of what it's like to be a small child, especially around older relatives. In today's two stories, the relatives could not be more different from one another, but each made a lasting impact on our storytellers. First up, we'll welcome Kim Weitkamp. She'll tell you just a little bit about Aunt Louise. Here's Kim, recorded live in the Appleseed studio.
I loved my Aunt Louise, and I loved going to her house. She was a character that I, even as a writer and storyteller, could not have written. My Aunt Louise was a broad woman with arms that swung and undulated. My pap told her once that if she painted those, she could lead the parade. He didn't get a meal for like a week. But I loved her. She always wore these tank top muumuus made with this funky polyester, supposedly silk, not quite fabric, with all kinds of bold colors. And even though they had an air conditioning unit in the window, it was always sweltering hot because she did not have just one stove. She had two. She loved to stand at the stove and cook, ovens ablaze with all kinds of casseroles and cake. The tops filled 4 different burners on each stove, 8 total, with pots and saucepans bubbling and boiling. And she'd be stirring and stirring and sweating and sweating. And I was fascinated by those flaps that hung from the upper part of her arm, and they would swing as she moved. And if she was really focused on one pot, I would get up underneath her arm as a little kid, reach up and grab that flap and squeeze it. And she would take the spoon out of whatever she was working in and she'd swap it at me and she'd say, "Girl, get out of here." And then she'd throw her head back and laugh and laugh and laugh. I loved my Aunt Louise. Now, if she was done cooking and tired, she usually picked up the weekly flyer from the Sunday paper, folded it, and began to fan herself, sitting at the Formica top table. And you kept your distance, because if she was sitting, you didn't want to get within arm's reach of her because she would snatch you up. And when she snatched you up, you didn't go on her lap. You went into her lap, and folds of flesh would begin to surround you. And your brothers, sisters, and cousins would stop playing, and they'd say, "Keep your head up!" And you'd sit in there as it surrounded you, and you'd lift your head up and lift your head up until you could breathe. And you were in that woman as tight as a cherry from a can of fruit cocktail in a red Jell-O mold on a Baptist Sunday potluck table. But you put up with it because something good was going to happen. If she just made her snickerdoodles, which she was famous for, crispy edged, cake middle, large granules of sugar that would pop in your mouth, and a nut from the walnut tree right in front of her house. She'd give it to you, and as you ate it, it would still be warm, and crumbs would tumble down, and she'd say, "You're my sweet cakes, baby. Do you know you're my sweet cakes?" Or if she'd just been to the Green Dragon flea market, she would buy brooches. The back pin rusty, half the rhinestones missing, the remaining ones murky. There were flowers and giraffes and butterflies. And she'd say, "Look what I got for $1 at the Green Dragon flea market." And she'd pin it on my sister or myself, and you felt like a queen. Or she'd tell a joke that only she thought was funny. I never got them. No one else laughed, but she thought it was hilarious. And if she started to laugh while you were in there, it was like a blender. And oh, the worst thing was if you were in her lap and she had a hot flash. You could lose weight. My sister one time went into her lap at 41 pounds. My Aunt Louise had a hot flash. She came out at 36 pounds. But you put up with it because you loved her and she loved you. And there were stories told, jokes told, baked goods eaten, pins of beautiful colored things put on your clothing, and you just felt so special. And when she was done with you, she'd extract you from her lap, and there'd be a sucking sound as she'd extract you from her lap. And as she put you down, she'd pot you on the bum. And as you ran away, smelling all of your clothes embedded with the smell of Rose de Toilette, she'd say, "Go on, girl, get on with it." Now, I am an extremely positive person, or at least I like to think I am. I face every day just asking Heavenly Father to allow me to be an intersection person, meaning that my life intersects with the people that I'm supposed to intersect with so that I can make an impact. And I'm pretty much happy anywhere I go. I'm happy here. I'm in a hotel room, but I'm having the time of my life here in Utah, mainly because I love the people. And with all of that, and people, my mom even calls me Pollyanna. But even with all of that, there are still days where there are hurdles that I don't want to jump. There are still days where I don't want to get out of bed and face what I know is to come. And I swear that on those days, there have been times where on the edge of the wind, I've smelled roses. And I hear her voice like she's right behind me saying, "Go on, girl. Get on with it." And that's the beauty of my Aunt Louise's lap.
That was Kim Weitkamp with Aunt Louise. And, Kim looks on Aunt Louise as the voice that comes back to her even long after Aunt Louise is gone to inspire her and encourage her. And as I listened to Kim's story, I began to wonder, when that voice comes to me, that voice outside myself that encourages me and fortifies me and inspires me, whose voice is it that I hear? Now, I'll be straight with you in saying I feel like I know where that voice comes from. But when I hear that voice of encouragement or correction or inspiration, what does it sound like? Whose voice does it sound like? Who is my Aunt Louise? And I realized I had some ideas about that. When I was in high school, in my sophomore English class, I got introduced to Harper Lee's masterpiece, To Kill a Mockingbird. My English teacher, Miss Shelley, was the person who put that book on my desk and on the desk of every member of the class. Assigned reading. The assignment came right on the heels of having read Pearl Buck's The Good Earth together as a class. Now, I don't remember that book well, but I will never forget the classroom discussion in which one student talked about not liking the book very much. And it's Miss Shelley's face, I remember, full of sorrow that someone would be so dismissive of a book she loved. It was that look that made me realize that these stories to which we were being introduced were like people. They were worth cherishing and loving and getting to know and learning from. And it's with that look from Miss Shelley in my mind that I went into reading To Kill a Mockingbird. And maybe because of that look, it's the first book from among all the books I was assigned to read that took on a life of its own, that became much more than an assignment. And some of the words that help me in the ways that Kim describes the words of Aunt Louise helping her come from Atticus Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird. I know that sounds weird, but maybe they even resonate a little in the voice of Gregory Peck, who played Atticus Finch in the movie version of the book. Now, that's not the only voice I hear, of course. In my first year of college, I bought a used copy of a collection of Ray Bradbury short stories that became a window into books like The Martian Chronicles and Dandelion Wine. And, it's sometimes the voice of Charles Holloway, the father of Will Holloway, from Bradbury's novel Something Wicked This Way Comes, that comes back to me to light my way in the dark. Sidney Carton is somewhere back there from Dickens' Tale of Two Cities. Sometimes that's the voice I hear. Does it seem unusual to you that Father Mulcahy, the chaplain from the old TV show MASH, is sometimes the voice I hear? My parents, like every adult their age in the 1970s and early 80s, watched MASH every week, and later on I watched it in reruns just about every night. And of course, go all the way back to 4th grade for me, and you find me standing a box set of the Chronicles of Narnia on my classroom desk, a Christmas present from my folks. And echoing through that magical country is a host of voices, including the voice of Aslan himself, talking me through the moments in which I most need courage and faith. I could go on, listing the voices that are part of the chorus that still speaks to me, urging me forward, filling me with faith even now, coming back to me, sometimes unbidden when I least expect it, but most need it. I've often felt like heaven speaks to me through those voices. And I could get more personal, perhaps, about the voices of actual people from my life, rather than characters in stories that come back to help and heal and inspire me. But the thing about the characters in stories is that they're part of our shared heritage. They're yours as well as mine. Those voices don't belong just to me, but to every kid who read the Narnia books in 4th grade or To Kill a Mockingbird in high school. And maybe for you, the important stories are different ones than I've mentioned. But for you, as well as for me, choosing good ones, treasuring them up, paying attention as they come into our lives, caring for them and listening to them when they come back to us is a pretty good way to keep going when the going gets tough. That's where Kim's story took me. Where did the story take you? And who will you take along? There's a lot coming up, but before we get back to it, I just want to let you know about a special treat for you and your family from one of the other podcasts in the BYUradio family of podcasts. It's Constant Wonder, and just in time for Advent season, starting December 1st, Constant Wonder will be dropping a short daily episode with an inspiring Christmas theme. It might be a story from nature, art, or the Bible.
Because remember, in the story, the Magi were not Jewish. They were coming from the East, from different traditions. And yet they're being drawn together in this moment of worship. It kind of gives you that hope that maybe there would be this ability for us to cross all the things that divide us and worship and wonder together.
Each episode is only about 10 minutes long, making it easy to bring the Christmas spirit into your life throughout the holidays. Check out Constant Wonder starting December 1st on your favorite podcast platform or the BYUradio app. Find them on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or YouTube, all kinds of ways to get in on the Advent season with a daily episode from Constant Wonder starting December 1st. It's a pleasure to be with you today on the Appleseed, and it's time to meet our second pair of relatives, great-grandmother Mo and her grandson, West Virginia storyteller Adam Booth. Here's Adam's story. It's called Hanukkah at Mo's, recorded live in the Appleseed studio.
Thanks, everybody. I want you to take a few seconds and think about your grandparents' home, or maybe even your great-grandparents' home. My great-grandparents lived just down the street from us, and they owned a furniture store. So to go visit them when I was a kid in the 1980s, walking into their home, you saw the finest, fanciest, most up-to-date furnishings of the 1960s. They had long green drapes that covered the windows, and they had thick blue carpet that if you fell into, you could easily get lost. And the whole downstairs was covered with a thick sheet of plastic, like a runner that went all around, showed you where to walk, and it went up the stairs to the second floor. I see that you're nodding. You know what? Maybe you experienced that in your relatives' homes. Well, their home seemed so fancy because of that. They had a big wooden door on the front. It was white, and to open it up, you stepped right into a hall. And I don't mean a hallway. I mean a hall. A room that's purpose was to be between two other rooms. And just to the left of the door, there was a table, and the sole purpose of this table was to put mail on. It's a very fancy room. Over here, there was a pedestal upon which sat the only telephone in the entire house. There was a chandelier that hung down from the ceiling. There was a grandfather clock that I don't ever remember seeing it work. And then there was that staircase that went up to the second floor with that powdery blue carpet. The second floor, which was a place where no children ever were allowed to go. And so, of course, you know where I always tried to go. Now, we spent a lot of time over at my great-grandparents' house, especially during holidays. Now, the maternal side of my family is Jewish, and so we spent all the Jewish holidays over at my great-grandparents' home. We started the year with Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and then we would go there to celebrate Passover, and before that, Purim. And my favorite holiday that we had there was Hanukkah, because as a kid, it's the best of the Jewish holidays. You get presents, you get to play games like dreidel, and you get to eat potato latkes. I mean, it's just the best. Or at least I thought I understood why it was my favorite of the holidays. So we'd go to my great-grandparents' house and open that door and go into the hall, and there was that forbidden staircase. And as I told you before, I was a little kid, which meant I could get away with a lot without people seeing, because most people's eyes are way up here. And when you're down here, well, one of the things I could do was I figured out that I could get up to about the 4th step without anybody knowing. I was sitting on the 4th step with my back against the front of the 5th step, looking to the front of the house. The chandelier had a paper dreidel hanging from it as a decoration, and just to the right of the front door from this view was a coat tree. Now, they had a closet, so I don't know why they had a coat tree, and we never used the closet. Whenever people came in, they put their coats right on that coat tree, and it was only about as thick as the narrow part of my wrist here, and it had 4 thumbs on the top sticking out like this for you to hang all your coats on. Hanukkah. I'm sitting on that 4th step, and the door opens up, and the late autumn wind would blow around, and that paper dreidel would flip back and forth. It would say, noon, hey, noon, hey, noon, hey, those Hebrew letters there. And the cousins that would come in, they would take off their coats and look at the coat tree, which was already laden with many coats, and try to figure out, do we put coats on opposite sides to balance? Do we try to see which peg has the fewest coats? And they get 1 coat on, and then 2 more coats. And then when the very last coat was put up there, gentle, back away from it. And as they were backing away, that coat tree would come tumbling down to the ground, bam, like that. And the coats would splay all over the place, and people would say, this happens every single year. Another person would call out, tradition. They'd take that coat tree and put it back up and gather the coats, and as they were hanging the coats back up, getting them all back on there, when everybody was looking that way, I'd push myself up like this and scooch back 1 step and then bring my feet up, and now I was on the 5th step. And then I'd wait for the next cousins to come in, the door would open, the wind would blow, that dreidel would flip back and forth, noon, hey, noon, hey, noon, hey. They'd put their coats on and it would fall back down. This happens every single year. And as they were putting it back up, I was on the 6th step, halfway to the 2nd floor. My plan was going perfectly until she came around the corner. My great-grandmother, who had made all the rules, who had been back in the kitchen, she came out of the kitchen for some reason. She came around the corner into the hall. Now, I got to tell you about my great-grandmother. As a kid, I knew very little things about her. One thing I knew, she was old. How old? I have no idea. Somewhere between 20 and 100. She always had a scowl on her face. And she was mostly legs. Her legs went up to right about here. And her arms came down, and she came around the corner, and she was like a great-grandmother Frankenstein. Only her arms had been put on backwards. They made triangles that pointed behind her, and they were bolted to her side, and she came around the corner like this. She had this radar that could tell there was a child on the stairs. And she came down the hall, and I'm sure her legs were moving, but who could tell because her polyester pant legs were this wide. And she just kind of floated down the hall. And she got to the end of the stairwell and placed this surprisingly graceful and beautiful hand on the finial right there at the end, and she pivoted around and saw me. I jumped up and bounded down the stairs right past her. She was coming up the steps, left foot together, left foot together, her hand gliding up the rail. And I had come down, I was standing here on the floor, and as her feet came up, left foot together. I just hoped I wasn't in trouble. Left foot together, and when her feet were at eye level, I noticed that the heel of one of her shoes was much taller than the other one. Left foot together, and she was gone. My great-grandmother had been born in Philadelphia, the daughter of immigrants from Lithuania. She was the youngest of 3 children, and right after she was born, her mother died. And her dad remarried, and it became something of a Cinderella situation for her. Her stepmother did not like the youngest child. And then they had a child together, and they favored that one over her and made her do all the chores and all the work around the house. I'm not making this up. And as she grew, it was such a difficult situation for her that she decided to run away from home. And so when she was a young teenager, she left Philadelphia, a single teenage Jewish daughter of immigrants, escaping, traveling across the Appalachian Mountains by herself in the 1920s. And she landed in eastern Kentucky. Why there? Well, her older sister had already made the same journey. And not too long after that, she met a handsome young man who was also the son of Lithuanian immigrants who had landed in Cincinnati, and he had come to East Kentucky to start a business. They fell in love. They started a family. They moved to West Virginia. And several generations later, I was standing next to their stairway, thinking of my great-grandmother. For how long, I don't know, but then the floor creaked, and I saw that she was coming back down the stairs, left foot together, left foot together. And I was a kid. I didn't know any better. I just blurted out, "Hey, Mo," that's what we called her, Mo. "Hey, Mo, what happened to your foot?" And she stopped and folded her body backwards to sit on that 6th step, and she padded right next to her. And I came up and I sat right next to her on that step. I looked up at her and she looked down. "You want to know what happened to my leg?" If that's what it was. It was long ago. Your great-grandfather and I used to take a drive every Sunday, get out of the house and listen to music and look at the world and talk. And one time he was turning off of a very country road onto a very busy road. And he thought it was clear, but it wasn't. And as he turned the corner, a car came right up and bam, right into the side of our car, right where I was sitting, crunched the door up, threw me like this. It was terrible. I was wrapped in this story. I said, "Did you die?" No. They tried, but I didn't. I was in the hospital for a long, long time. I didn't die, but they took a piece of my leg. So it's a lot shorter than the other one, which is why I have to wear this special shoe with a heel that's taller than the other one, so I'm not lopsided. She stared at me for a while and said, "Do you know why we celebrate Hanukkah?" And I said, "Yeah, to eat potato latkes." She said, "Well, it's a lot more than that. I have to get back to the kitchen. I don't have time for the whole story, but a long time ago, the Assyrians and the Greeks came into control over the Jewish people. And they wanted the Jews to start living the way they did. They wanted them to worship all of their gods. They had many, but the Jewish people didn't want that. The Jewish people have one God, many names, but one God. And they wanted the Jews to eat the foods that they ate, even if it meant breaking the law that the Jews had. They wanted them to do all these things that the Jews didn't want. Can you imagine someone coming into power and then trying to change how everybody else lived? Well, the Jews didn't want it, so they started to fight back. And normally you think of a leader of an army as being young and fit, but the leader that emerged for this army was a surprise. It was a very, very old man. As old as you? Older. And he led those forces, and they were way outnumbered, but they fought for what they believed in. And a time came when he knew he was going to die, so he gathered his children around, and they called them Maccabees. It's not a real last name, it's an acronym. It stands for Who is Like You? Because there is no one like God. No one that can perform miracles, no one that can protect us. And the one son, Judah, he started to lead the forces, and they fought, and even though they were outnumbered, they started to win, and then they did win. They won, and they took back over the temple that had been captured. And when they went in, there was a menorah there. It's like a candelabra. They only had enough oil, though, to light it for one night. But there was a miracle. It burned for 8 nights. And it was a sign of the miracle that they could win, even though they were outnumbered. Because who is like you? Do you understand? Do you have any questions? Yeah. Can we go upstairs? No, she said, stand up. It's almost time to eat. And we stood up, and we were about to go down the stairs when the door opened one last time. The last of the cousins to come in. The wind blew. That dreidel flipped around. Noon, hey, noon, hey. And as they put their coats on an overly bulging coat tree, it came crashing to the ground. As they laughed and went to pick it up, my great-grandmother pulled me in close, and she said, you know, being Jewish is a lot like that coat tree. We have a purpose here. We have a life to live and things to do, but sometimes that life gets so burdened and there's so many outside forces that we just fall down, crash to the ground. But there's always one there to help pick us back up. Who is like you? Do you understand? Well, go play. We'll eat soon. And we did eat soon, and the tables were spread from the front of the house to the very back, and we had potato latkes with applesauce. That's what we eat on our latkes, applesauce. And we had matzo ball soup, and afterwards everybody pitched in and cleaning up and moving the chairs and the tables, and we had presents, and then we played dreidel. It's a top game that has 4 Hebrew letters on the outside, Nun, Hey, Gimel, Shin. It stands for a great miracle happened there. You spin, and whatever side lands face up tells you if you put in some coins or take some back, and we would spin and see how it landed and do what we were supposed to do and spin and give and take coins and spin. And then we wanted to be like the dreidel. And so all the little kids, we stood up, and now after we were done spinning, we started spinning around and around just as fast as we could until the world became a blur and you couldn't stand up anymore. We came crashing down to the ground laughing. And when the world became level again, back up and at it again. Back up, spinning around and around and around, and all the people became a blur. We fell down again and stood up and spun around and fell down and stood up and spun around and fell down and got up and fell down and got back up and fell down. And we got back up and we fell down and we got back up. And from off in the corner, I could hear my great-grandmother say, I think they understand.
Adam Booth with Hanukkah at Moe's. Who are the oldest living people in your family? How much do you know about them? It can be a powerful experience to sit down and learn more about your family and how their stories may have shaped your own. Special thanks to Kim Weitkamp and Adam Booth for their family stories today. We hope they inspire you to gather some of your own. After all, sharing and listening to great stories can change your family's world.
The Appleseed is produced by Wendy Folsom,
Sam Payne,
and Brian Tanner.
Our audio engineers are Ashton Parkinson
and Carly Wilson.
The rest of the Appleseed team is Kelly Wehrmeister,
Trent Horton,
Evadane Hendricks,
Miriam Arce,
and Tristan Schetzel.
A special thanks to the subscribers of our podcast who rate us or leave reviews.
You help people find the show.
We also love to receive emails at theappleseed@byu.edu.
Your thoughts and comments help us to shape the future of the Appleseed.
We're pleased and proud to be among the many podcasts produced by the BYU Radio family.
And you can find episodes of the Appleseed wherever podcasts are found, on the BYU Radio app or at byuradio.org/Appleseed.
I'm Sam Payne, and the whole team can't wait to be with you again on the Appleseed.